beautiful art and the power of your words and your spirit. So deep gratitude to you, my sister, my relative, my sibling. It's good to be back here in the space with all of us. And you know, I mean, I want to invite us just, you know, before I get started, to just take a moment. You can close your eyes if that makes you feel comfortable, if you want to keep your eyes open, but let's just take a moment to find some stillness, a moment to remember that the spirit that guides us all is greater than the chaos of this moment. Take a moment to remember that we are loved and we still have the capacity to give love. Let's take a moment in this stillness to remember that even if we could not produce another thing, we still are so valuable. Let's take another moment in the stillness to remember that although we are sheltered in place in many different ways, that we are still radically interconnected. Amen. You know, it's good to be back here in the space with us all and thinking about this moment. I welcome you back as you feel led to come back. As I was thinking about in this moment, what would be the right words to bring to such a spiritually connected community and tribe like Thrive? You know, when I got a chance to hang out with y'all last year, I felt very much so what some of the words were saying earlier in our time today, that Thrive is the future, that Thrive represents a lot of the potential of where it is that we need to go as a people, not just here in the Bay, not just here in the States, but around this world. That we've got to find a different way of being. We've got to find the different kind of doing. We've got to find a different way to become and to be the collective tribe that we are. And yet in this moment, what I've been thinking about is, what is it that we need to be doing? You know, last year when I was with you all, I talked a lot about the need for us to become. That the right first question is not what do we need to do? The right first question is who do we need to become? But I've been reminding people over the last several months that my invitation for us to become was not an invitation for us to not do, but rather it was about prioritization. But it feels to me that in this moment is giving us a lot of invitation to do. When we think about 2020 and we think about all that has happened, COVID-19 and a global pandemic that has rocked literally the world off of its axis. I think it's something, you know, some of y'all who know me know I come from the Pentecostal tradition. That's both good and bad because, you know, as Pentecostals, we see something in everything, even if ain't nothing there. But, you know, I grew up in that church where we were swinging from the chandeliers and rolling underneath the benches, and spirit was moving us. If it wasn't spirit, then the usher was, but something was moving you. And I would say that as I think about COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think about the reality that what has stopped the world has literally been an attack on our respiratory system. It has been an attack on our ability to breathe, on our ability to take in the oxygen and to breathe out the carbon. That COVID-19 got inside our lungs and stopped our ability to do what we have naturally been created to do. And I've wondered if COVID-19 is also a symptom of a deeper spiritual problem, that we had begun to lose our ability to be natural, to be as we were made to be. And so that disruption has happened, and it's knocked us off our axis. And we had to begin to shelter in place. We had to begin to quarantine ourselves from one another and from the elements. And then we began to experience here in this country a spiritual awakening. Again, it took the crucifixion of darker bodies in front of us to get us to some resurrected consciousness, to remember that Black lives, not only do they matter, but as Yanni said, they are essential, and that we were going to need to turn our eyes into the way in which we had lost our ability to hold on to one another, to find that resurrected consciousness so that it could move us out of the fear of being locked up, not just in our physical homes, but in our spiritual homes, in our mental homes, in our emotional homes. We needed a jolt that would move us back into the streets to declare that we know we are better than this. And yet in the middle of all of this that we have been pushing and struggling with, we've been having to do so while resisting Trumpian imperialism. We've been having to resist a material kind of evil that is not metaphoric, but a material kind of evil that has metastasized itself into the culture of our society. And so it brings us to the question, what is it that we need to do? You know, I've been saying for some time that if we try to respond to a spiritual problem with only a political, if we try to respond, to a spiritual condition with only a political solution, we will come up short. But I believe that the emergence of the spiritual awakening that happened after the crucifixion of Sister Breonna and Brother George Floyd, that awakening has begun to happen inside of us. But now there is the need for us to recognize the importance of our political responsibility and our civic action. You know, for some years, myself, when we came out of Ferguson, we came out of that awakening that happened with the crucifixion of Michael Brown. And there was a question that came upon us when we were on the streets of Ferguson as spiritual people. And one of my colleagues asked us the question, are we called to be chaplains of a failing empire, or are we called to be prophets of a righteous resistance? I think there's a very interesting question that we must sit in. Are we called to be chaplains of a failing empire? Meaning, are we called to try to hold up something that actually may need to die? Or are we called to be prophets of a righteous resistance? Prophets who are both speaking truth to power about the moment, and prophets who are also foretelling of a time that is coming. And who is it? What is that action that we need to begin to do? And you know, for a few years, I lived in that binary of chaplains versus prophets, and knowing that the imperial structure over the last 400 years was not enough to save us from this moment. I knew within myself that I did not want to pull down the pharaoh of this moment only to become the new one, but rather I wanted to imagine and live in a world that has no pharaohs. I wanted to live in a land where we were seeking promised land. I'd rather live in a land where I'm living off manna and getting water out of a rock than live up under the oppressive structures of empire or be the one who wields the whip. I didn't want to be a chaplain of that. I wanted to be a prophet. But then I stood in New York a couple of years ago and I was talking about chaplains versus prophets, and a Ugandan brother came up to me who survived some of the challenges and the pains of their struggle in Uganda. And he came up to me and he said, "Dear brother, I think you have missed an invitation, because I don't think it's just chaplains of a failing empire or prophets of a righteous resistance. I think we are called to be midwives." I said, "Say more, brother." He said, "We are called to be midwives to the beloved community." And so I want to talk to us just for a couple moments about midwives. See, I love the idea of a midwife because it's moving us away from the masculine and more into the feminine. Because I believe if we're going to actually survive this moment, and if we're going to participate with giving birth into something new, there is a divine spiritual move away from the historically understood European ideal of the masculine, and an invitation into the West African indigenous framing of the feminine, that the Spirit is inviting us away from the warrior and away from the fighter into the role of the midwife.
Ashe.
A midwife who steps in not as one to create the life, but one to come alongside the carrier. That the midwife who is trained to recognize what is happening in that moment of pregnancy. The midwife who in terms has at times understood what it means to carry life, but understands one's role is there to come alongside the pregnant. The midwife is the one who holds the hand of the one who's in pain. The midwife is the one who assures the one who is stressed out that there is hope on the other side. The midwife who understands what is happening. The midwife is there to serve the process of new life coming into the world. And so I want to say to us that our action in this moment is called to be midwives, that we're called to actually come alongside the pregnancy of our moment, the pregnancy of us as a collective people, and help give birth to a new moment for each other. Now, you see, just as our sister Valerie Carr says, she says that maybe, she said this after the election of Donald Trump, that maybe the darkness of this moment is not the darkness of a tomb, but rather the darkness of a womb. And maybe in the midst of all of this chaos is actually the birthing of something brand new. Couldn't it be that in this moment, the very thing that's happening is the thing that we've been praying for? It's the thing that we've been longing for. It's the thing that made y'all come together and form Thrive. It's the thing that forced me into East Oakland with the loved ones who have pistols in their pockets. It's this something on the inside. There's life in the middle of it. There's some new constructing coming together. But in order for that to happen, I done preached the book off my shelf. In order for that to happen, and literally the name of that book said, this is an uprising. In order for that to happen, we are going to have to move into action. Midwives recognize that new life is coming, so they support the deconstruction of the current dynamic. You see, when that baby is in the womb, as I watched my wife give birth to our 3 daughters, I recognized that the world that that baby had come to know was deconstructing around it. The placenta that that baby sat inside broke open. The world as it knew it began to spill out from all around it. And that baby began to go through a journey, through a birth canal, seeing light at the end of its tunnel to reemerge as something different than what it understood itself to be. Well, I'm here to tell you that I believe that what is happening in this moment is that the systems and the structure and the society, not just grounded here in this country, but the way in which white supremacy and whiteness and the terrorism that came out of that part of Europe during that time that has went and diseased the world, that it is actually coming to an end, and that there is a new way of human beings being together, a new way of treating one another, a new way of treating the planet that is coming into fruition. So what does it mean for us to come alongside that work? I believe that if we are going to come alongside that work, it is going to call on us to organize. It is going to call on us to be found in the middle of the messiness. It is going to call on us to put our hands and our feet, our hearts and our minds into action so that we can help bring about the world. Not because we have all the answers, but actually because we do not. You know, one of the lines I love is that an organized lie, it will always be more powerful than disorganized truth. An organized lie will always be more powerful than disorganized truth. So this is why we've got to organize the truth. We've got to come together across our difference. We're going to have to build bridges across difference. And right now, the disease that is in the land might actually keep us from being able to build bridges with many of our relatives who right now find themselves on the side of toxicity, wearing red hats, spewing out hatred and violence against others. But we can find ways to bridge with one another. We can find ways to bridge and come to each other with difference. We can find ways to get active in the movement. But I think one of the things that is very important as we come on this journey, that we must recognize that one of the most powerful things, and I said this to you all last year, one of the most powerful things we must do in this moment is to not become imperial ourselves. You know, Dr. King said, that power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. In this moment, I believe that we must push ourselves into public, online, and private space like we never have before. And we must work to deconstruct this system and these structures and the way that we've been built. I do not believe that it is our call to continue to try to hold together a capitalistic system that seeks to extract the life and the embodiment out of people and out of communities and out of the land. It is not our job to try to protect and preserve police departments that continue to destroy the lives of Black and brown and trans relatives across this country. It is not our job to preserve these structures, but it is our job through our organizing, through our voting, through our conversations to deconstruct this existing system. And as we do that, we will begin to reconstruct a new world that is worthy of us all, a new society that is worthy of us all. But people ask me, well, Ben, where do we start? We start by coming together. We don't start because we have the solutions. We start because we have the shared analysis that something is deeply wrong, but we are having a spiritual awakening that says it is time for us to get to work. It is time for us to come alongside the new life that is coming forth. It is time for us to follow Black women who have inside of them the deep analysis and the spiritual anointing to invite us forward into this moment that we have. It is time for us to undo the way that patriarchy has led us and undo the way that violence has led us and to stand ourselves in a different place. It is time for us to not just trade seats out of the chairs, but to get rid of the chairs and to allow the divine feminine to lead us into the new tomorrow. And I think in order for us to do that, one of the most important things that we're going to have to do in order to hold on to that is we're going to have to teach ourselves how to sacrifice our privilege. Because privilege causes us to ask the wrong question in moments. What about me? What role do I have? What place will I have? If I give up my place to someone else and they leave, will I be okay? Will I have what I need if I don't fight for it in the way that capitalism has taught us to fight? But I believe if we allow love to lead us, if we recognize that the Spirit is leading us, then we've got to trust and we've got to give ourselves over and we've got to use the privilege that we have in service to where it is we want to go. And that's why I've been saying to folks in a democracy that in this moment, the right action is not to vote your own interests, but rather to vote the interests of those most marginalized around you. When we go to vote in the ballot, vote for Black women, vote for our trans relatives, vote for the unhoused, vote for the incarcerated, vote for the poor, vote for those diseased by COVID-19, vote for those who are marginalized, vote for the immigrant, vote for the Muslim, vote for those who are most marginalized around us, vote for Black people. Because when we will take our vote, and we will leverage it for the purpose of transforming the world. When we will choose to take the power out of our hand and put it in the hands of someone else to allow those folks to guide us, I believe we will find ourselves in a safer place. We are called to be midwives. As our world is deconstructing around us, I believe we must actually have hope, recognizing that the world we have been in is coming to an end. But in the words of John the Revelator from the Christian scriptures, behold, I see a new heaven and a new earth. For the old heaven and the old earth has passed away. And I believe we are in a moment for a new heaven and a new earth coming upon us. And so let us give ourselves over, not only to be prophets of a righteous resistance, but to be midwives to belonging. Midwives to beloved community. And I would say this as I close my comments, that in the history of our journey, getting to the place of new awakening of resurrection will at times be at cost for some of us. I want to think back to the story borrowing from the Jewish scriptures and the Hebrew Bible, where you have the story of, I like to call them their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You know, oftentimes we refer to them in the English translated scriptures, they're referred to as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or in the black church, we used to call them a bad Negro. But, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But I don't call them by those names all the time because that's the names that the Babylonians gave them. They pulled them from their homeland and they renamed them. They named them in their own culture. And they found themselves in a moment like the one we find ourselves in, a strange moment where empire had raised up an imperial statue. And it told them all that if you do not bow down to the statue, if you do not bow down to the image of empire, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace to your death. But Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah said, we will not bow down to the image of empire. And they said that if our God, they said, our God is able to deliver us, but even if our God does not, we will still not bow down to your graven image. I want to say to us that regardless as to what happens on November 3rd, we are hoping that we get out and vote like we've never voted before to move this white supremacist out of the White House. But we know that even if he moves out of the White House, Trumpism and white supremacy and the function of empire may not necessarily leave. Let us be like those three Hebrew boys that said, even in the face of empire, we refuse to bow down to white supremacy. We refuse to bow down to imperialism. Because in that story, even when they took them and threw them into the fiery furnace, the story says that there appeared the image of one. There appeared the image of one who took the heat out of the fire and preserved their lives. Family, I'm telling you, let us commit ourselves to being midwives. Let us bring into our moment the world as it should be. And may the God of peace, may the spirit of love, may the power of our ancestors guide us into creating the world of belonging. God bless you. I love you.